So, Rob, welcome to Hive Talking. I'm really pleased that you're able to join us, especially at this time in your life, which is quite momentous, and we'll certainly get to that. I think everyone will know by now that you have decided to step away from being Chief Exec of North East Lincolnshire Council in May.
Yep.
And after, well, I hope we'll get to talk about it, after a great history of running the council and North East Lincolnshire. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, as you step out the door, as is commonplace now with politicians, I know you're not a politician, but you might leave a note for your successor. Now, if you were to do such a thing, what would be, give me 3 things that you might put onto that note that you would like to leave as maybe some advice or guidance to the person who steps into your shoes.
Okay. Well, firstly, hello, Mark. Thank you for having me on.
It's all
Pleasure
right.
to be here. Great to talk about a few things, and particularly our patch. Okay, so that's given me time to think about the answer. I think, number 1, to my successor, pick 3 things that matter. 1 for the organisation, 1 for the place, and 1 for yourself, and stick with them no matter what. Because there'll be 10,000 other things that you have to quite rightly focus on too. But don't lose sight or focus on those 3 things. Surround yourself with really good people. And that can take time. But make sure that you surround yourself with really good people. People you can trust, people you can rely on, people that will be there when the chips are down, because they will be down at some point. And the third one is, I speak from experience, look after yourself. You cannot keep every plate spinning. You cannot achieve every single thing. You will not have all of the answers. That's cool. That's fine. That's leadership. Well-being matters.
That's sound advice. And, that's interesting because basically get a focus, build a team around you who can help you deliver it, and don't burn yourself out before you've done it. It's that's a business approach. And I suppose leadership's the same regardless, isn't it?
It is. I think the common denominator is whatever sector, whatever part of the world you operate in as a leader, yourself, the people around you, and your focus. Things will go wrong, but not everything will go wrong.
Yeah.
And stay true. Stay true. Yeah.
Oh, that's really, I think that's got to be good advice, whether you're just starting out in whatever career you're in, and even if you're diversifying, shall we say, into other things. I was about to say retiring.
Let's
but
not use the R word.
It's not right. Yeah. Okay, so let's just go back again, because we've started at, or not at the end, but we've started at where we are in present day. So I'd like to go back a bit, because you have got a shed load of experience and insight into, this area. One of the few people, if not the only person, from a non-elected position, who's got the oversight of the whole of North East Lincolnshire and everything that goes on in it. So just give us a bit, because you're a lawyer by trade.
A long time ago, by background, I was a qualified solicitor. Yeah.
And so, how did you get into public office?
Into local government. So you might have heard this story before, but we're now making it public.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, I was just starting out as a trainee solicitor. I was offered a role at Cleethorpes Borough Council as a trainee solicitor. Not long after that, I met someone called Tracy. That is the reason I'm sat here talking to you fundamentally. So moments in your life. I didn't choose local government as a career. Talking about the people around you. Someone I'll mention in dispatches right now, the first person I worked for, I suppose, John Murray, who was a great lawyer. I learned how to be a lawyer from him, and therefore knew I wasn't going to be a very good lawyer, because he was like another level. But he supported me, he nurtured me. Reorganisation, topical at the moment actually, came to what was then Humberside, as you'll know.
Yeah.
4 councils were created, North East Lincolnshire being one of them. I qualified as a solicitor about the time of reorganisation. I applied for a role with the council. I was appointed as an assistant solicitor, and the rest is history. And you either fall in love with local government, Mark, or you don't. And it's not about getting it; it's about understanding what it is and what it isn't. And we'll probably explore some of that in this conversation. And it's not about being better than the private sector or public sector, all that sort of stuff. But it's you either have it or you don't, and you either connect with it or you don't. And it occurred to me as I look back and reflect a lot, as I have been doing, that I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. Then I realised I wanted to work in local government.
Okay.
And I happened to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
So working with people.
Yeah.
Understanding and connecting with the world of politics. Politics really interests me. I have no desire to be a politician. I say that as I say that out of respect, by the way, not criticism. But operating at that interface, learning how to, over time, having the opportunity to get involved in major projects that affect a place and how it is shaped and people's lives, good or bad, making mistakes, learning from it, having great people around you to learn from. You get the bug. And I've been very lucky. They've stuck with me. I've progressed a career here that I would never have dreamt of progressing. And here I am 11 years after being a chief exec talking to you about the last 31. And it is strange thinking about it. But you've either got the local government bug or you haven't. I got it quickly.
And clearly you did, because you've, and again, we'll come to that, but you've excelled in your style, and your approach has been, it's been good for North East Lincolnshire when you look at all the checks and balances, which is what we all do when we come to different junctures. It's really interesting when I listen across the in the community that I work with, the different views about local government, not about Rob Watts, but about local government, the council, and it always seems to stem from individual experiences, and most people don't see the whole picture of the council. They see the bit that they're involved with. So I wonder, you've done a lot of dealings, because I know that you're a strong believer in partnerships, and you've done a lot of work with businesses, large and small. In your experience, what myths would you like to bust about what people say over a pint or over the dinner table about the council? What kind of myths would you like to say that this is?
Okay, I might not dispel every myth, but I'll just talk about local government, and I understand. I'll try to look at it through the lens of someone who's a resident. Well, I'm a resident, who receives services every now and then. I'm one of those people who has their bins emptied. I'm one of those people, or not, as the case may be. Yeah. I happen to be one of those people every now and then as well, and I don't get any preferential treatment for the avoidance of any doubt. Okay, so what is local government? It depends on which way you access it. So most people's experience of a council is the point at which they have contact with it for a reason. Yeah. It might be a planning application. It might be to apply for a licence. It might be to have some fly tipping removed. It might be because they've got some issues regarding childcare and so on and so forth. Or it's a business that might be engaged with trading standards or wants some economic development support. So you have a very direct and specific reason for engaging with the council. Yeah. That does not open your eyes up to what the council's role is and has become. And I say a council when I say the council, local government generally. When I started my career, the focus was on providing really important public services, which remains, by the way, hugely, hugely important. Of course it does. But the role of councils has evolved over the last 20, 25 years, and significantly over the last 10, austerity, COVID, all that sort of stuff, into that role as the convener, as that enabler, as that facilitator, getting people into a room to have a conversation about an area and how it's to be taken forward. Councils that are getting better at getting out of the way and not doing stuff because they think they have the answers, because they don't. So the business interface, for example, I saw from moment one, I think that it wasn't about the council being able to sort everything when I became chief executive, and it wasn't all bad when I became chief executive either. For the avoidance of any doubt, I'm no knight in shining armour, but the relationship needs to improve. And what was the basis of that relationship? It was about, let's work together to find common ground and what we need to do together to help this place go forward. So what's the basis of your relationship with the council? So to understand local government and dispel a few myths, yes, we're bureaucrats, but because we've got lots of powers, duties and responsibilities to fulfil, full stop. We do have to tick the odd box, and we do have to go through governance processes and decision making. And by the way, there are politicians who are elected to make those decisions. Yeah. I very rarely make any decisions as the chief executive of the council. I might give advice and guidance on those decisions behind the scenes, but you very rarely see me making big decisions, except during the pandemic, when I got the power to make all of the decisions. And I didn't take money then either, by the way, as you recall.
But you do advise politicians on,
all the time.
On the things that they have to think about.
Yeah, very much like a civil servant does. But bureaucracy is a myth. You can't bust that one. Some councils are really bureaucratic. Yeah. Some councils are not bureaucratic enough. Some councils get it right. And we've covered all of those three areas, I think, in my time as chief exec. Yeah. Some things we just don't get right. Some things we've done really well. Some things we haven't done enough of. Some things we do too much of. But I think people will generally interact with the council when they need something. Yeah. That's fine. But if you're interested in what a council can really do and its role going forward in the context of everything happening in the country right now, socioeconomic challenges, the health inequality gap, the role of public health, which we learnt from hugely through a pandemic. It took a pandemic for us all to understand the significance, the importance of the role of public health within local government, and long may that continue. Not the pandemic, not COVID, not infection control, but the role of public health. So yes, we're bureaucratic, but it needs to be only necessary, not over the top. But the enabler, the partner, the relationship builder, getting people in the room to make stuff happen is increasingly our role. Getting investors to think, this is a place we can do business in. They're talking to the government, but not on their own. They're talking to the government with business in the room, with the voluntary sector in the room. They're talking together. It's creating a sense of a place and a narrative about a place, which the council is a part of, not a dominant feature of. Yeah. That's a myth it's very difficult to dispel. Yeah. But that is my view of the role of a council in the 21st, 22nd century. You know.
Okay, so I understand the bureaucracy part. I mean, it's always going to be public money that you're dealing with. Yeah. And so there has to be checks and balances, and that's sometimes called bureaucratic, but they have to be in place. You would want them if it was your personal money and you were watching it. So I can see that. But then you mentioned about investors, and I think that's a really interesting point, because if you and I have discussed often about local businesses, that's my bag. That's what this podcast is about to some degree. Or these podcasts are about. So it's interesting because every business ratepayer is an investor, aren't they, really, in this area? So having an involvement in how that money's spent is a natural outcome. So what would you say to them? What would encourage the local business community to understand, well, this is all for the greater good, this is all for growing Grimsby?
Two things for me. One, I think I'm allowed to say this now with only 13 weeks to go. Don't assume, we'll start that again. The relationship we've got, the council and business generally, large business, small and medium-sized enterprise community, compared to other places in this country, is very, very healthy. By healthy, I don't mean it's perfect. I don't mean we all agree about everything, and nor should we. But we generally manage disagreements pretty well. We agree disagreeably pretty well. And we have a shared and common purpose. I give you the 2025 group. Yeah. The council might be there, but it ain't our group. I give you the Development and Growth Board. Key leaders in the business world around the table talking about the future of our place through the economic growth and regeneration lens and how they can add value as business leaders working with the council to take a place forward. We must not assume that all of that happens around the country. It's not criticism of the rest of the country, but I think we do that pretty well here. That's because it's a relationship built on trust and a level playing field, and no one being better than the other. And a lot of investment in relationships, professional relationships and so on, understanding of sectors. And I'd say to those, our SME community, 70-80% of our business community in North East Lincolnshire, that's huge. You are the lifeblood. I think that. I've said that many times. What does that mean? It means that your voice matters. It means that as a council, we need to continue to strive. I suppose that's the fourth thing I'd add to the list of notes to my successor. Make sure the relationships that we have with key sectors, not least business, not least the voluntary sector and the wider public sector, remain and improve. Honesty, listening actively, and closing the feedback loop, saying, you said, we did. I think we do that pretty well with the business community generally. And when you are engaging with us, if you look at the regeneration of the town centre, if you look at what's happening on the port of Grimsby, if you look at the Humber Freeport, if you look at stuff that's happening around regeneration generally across the borough, that hasn't happened, as you know, by accident. That's not happened because of the council acting on its own either. That's happened because of the strength of the relationships, the credibility of the story we're telling together, and our commitment to making that happen together. So that's why your investment matters, because we're putting it back together for the longer term, I think.
And you could, as a resident here and someone who runs businesses here, it's quite evident that there's a lot going on in Cleethorpes, in Grimsby, in Immingham, in the ports, right across the borough. There's a lot going on. It's not all universally met with great exaltation, but it's better than some towns, I suppose. I've been to where nothing's going on, and that silence feels a bit worse. Yeah. Than any kind of discord that you might create through change. Yeah. So we need to recognise that. I imagine. What do you think about the communication of all of this? And it's quite a diverse population of everything that we're trying to do in this area. How do you best communicate that out to as many people as possible? Because there is no more single point of communication as there used to be. How do you tackle that now then?
That's a very good question. Thank you. I think that's a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge going forward. So it needs to be a priority because change is happening now. Whether people agree with what's happening or not, we are starting to see it happen. My other message in relation to the previous question, by the way, is about patience, because we have to be patient, but it's now starting to happen. Yeah. Patient capital starting to happen.
Yeah.
So now that stuff is starting to happen, ideally, the engagement the extensive engagement, the listening to communities, engaging with them could have happened more perfectly and more grandly at the beginning of this journey, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, but it didn't. We needed to get on and do something with our partners to make the government look and listen, and they did, and here we are. But going forward, now that it's happening physically, I think it's really important that we don't just have a suite of great buildings, shiny buildings, a physical change that's apparent, but no real sense of change for local people, local communities, younger people particularly, our future and all of that. True, they are. So I think the council needs to get braver. I'm allowed to say this with 13 weeks to go. Braver at actually getting in the room with all sections of the community, business, younger people, older people, and just test what they think, what they hear, what they don't hear, what they agree with, and just listen. Yeah. It does not mean to say we enact everything, and that's how we start to tell the story about the next 5, 10, 15 years, because the changes we're seeing happening now, you know and I know, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, when we're sat in the pub in 15 years' time, and the physical changes happened, but we want to be talking about the socio-economic change that has happened. Yeah. Some of the most deprived communities in our borough are benefiting over the longer term because of that change that we all invested in over those 5, 10, 15 years. All that hard work.
I'm really glad you brought that up.
That's the key for me. That is the key.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation I seem to be having a lot more recently. I suppose it might be a bit of a challenge for you, because people, and they use other words, but I'll just keep referring to it as the trickle down, let me say the myth of trickle down economics, which basically means that we'll do big things and everybody else, it'll be fine because and evidently that isn't always the case. It needs to be, we need to do more to help them. Because there's been some amazing things happening on a macro scale in North East Lincolnshire, not least of all because of our newfound future in renewables and offshore wind. I know that's continuously used, but it made a big change in our view about the area. But how do we make sure that not just relying on trickle-down economics, how do we make sure that people in East Marsh, a startup business in West Marsh, actually benefits from what's happening at that scale?
From a council perspective, it's being really, really clear about what social value means, and we don't get that right all of the time. We're still a work in progress. When big investors come in from the outside, it's about making sure that if they are to engage and invest in the area, brilliant, and create jobs, brilliant. But let's make sure they're focusing on recruiting young people from this part of the world or reskilling older people from this part of the world to take those jobs that are coming. Yeah. It's making sure that, if you take young people as an example, what is the council doing to ensure that young people have opportunity and their aspirations are fulfilled over time? But what are we doing together to ensure that happens? What's an ABP or an Ørsted doing, as well as what's an E-Factor doing? Yeah. And are we doing it together? Yeah. We're having lots of conversations about fostering at the moment, aren't we? Yeah. And that's not the model for everything, but those conversations need to continue. So I think building from the bottom up now going forward, even though we've started, I think is key. Otherwise, the risk is lots of great stuff happens physically. Jobs are being created, jobs will be taken, but we need to make sure that as many of our local people, younger and older, reskilling, take those jobs that are coming. That's the role of the council, I think. Yeah. Being in the middle of that, being the facilitator, sometimes the arbiter, sometimes saying, actually, no, that's not what is best for this area. Yeah. We need a different type of conversation, investor X, developer Y, and neighbouring public body Z. This is what we think is best for North East Links. Let's have a conversation. Let's bring the business leaders in the room that agree with that to the voluntary sector leaders and keep talking. It's a lot. We talk about relationships a lot, you and I. Yeah. And I think the relationship piece, the trust piece, and being true to the mission, a popular word at the moment, mission, I think is key going forward. So if the focus is younger people having hope, aspiration, and opportunity, then let's all crystallise what that really, really means, given all of this stuff is happening.
So okay, that's really encouraging, because I suppose if you take the two ends of that, if you are getting big investment from large companies investing in our land and our position on the East Coast, and you can, and on the other side of the spectrum, you have young people being informed and told and inspired what that could mean to them. That means everything in between will also be happening. That new start businesses are made aware and are helped to connect themselves into that new future. That's interesting, I support that massively. And I suppose you're right. It can only work through partnership and patience. We've got to do those things. I just need to learn to be more patient, I suspect.
So do I, believe it or not.
Yeah. I just want to take us back for a bit. When I first started getting involved, before you became chief executive with the local authority, one of the things that struck me was they used to send out lots of documents to government, and nearly every document that went out, nearly always asking for something, started off with the lines, "We have some of the most deprived areas in North East Lincolnshire and the highest teenage pregnancy and." And it seemed a negative ideal or idea in a way of describing this area. And I felt it was permeating out into people's general beliefs and things. And I can say, certainly over the last few years, certainly over the last decade, that's turned around. We don't say that anymore. We don't celebrate almost that anymore. We go with a far more positive attitude. I have a feeling that's got a lot to do with the leadership and partnership working. But what's your views on that?
Having worked here a long time, having been thrust into the role that I will be exiting soon, which was a great honour when it happened and rather scary. I remember one of the very early conversations I had with my first leader, Chris Shaw, Councillor Shaw as was. And I remember, you might tell me off for saying this, having an early conversation about how I think I need to be able to do this job that I've been given. And my starting point with the conversation was, for me, deprivation is not a badge of honour. A phrase you've heard me use probably before. We need to turn it around. We need an ambition for this place, an ambition articulated with our partners, not for them. And we need to go to the government then over time when we're ready and talk about what's happening in this place, because we mustn't assume that they do know, and they didn't really fully extensively, and the Humber region, and really be more courageous and open about what the challenges are, but not as a badge of honour. There are some socioeconomic challenges here that are long-term, systemic, and will take time to address. That our health inequality gap pre-COVID, never mind post-COVID or during COVID, is not where it needs to be. For us, that's about developing a vision and an approach and a plan with our partners, particularly in the private sector at the time, to articulate to government that we have a plan to address this over time. It's around investment, it's around growth, it's around celebrating our heritage and not releasing or being reluctant to talk about it. It's about putting arts and culture in the heritage, in the regeneration mix. Oh, and at the same time, it's about stimulating the right kind of inward investment and economic growth. But bringing that together in the form of a plan and convincing the government to go for it. And jumping ahead, 2018, the country's first town deal was granted to this area. And it's important to say this area. The council might have signed it, but it weren't a town deal with the council. It was a town deal with the area that spawned another 99, but not like ours, saying that openly and honestly. Ours wasn't about money. It was about government going, whoa, there's a lot going on in this part of the world. We have confidence in those who have put this plan and this vision and mission together. We're going to invest in that relationship going forward. And I would say the rest has sort of followed.
Yeah.
In terms of funding, success with funding, confidence of external people, government, investors, business in thinking about North East Lincolnshire when in the past they weren't thinking about it. We've articulated an ambition. We're not shy about our challenges, but they're not a badge of honour. We need to do something about them. And let's do something about them together.
That really that resonates well, because I think that probably articulates the turning point for this area. We did spend a lot of time believing about we desperately needed money because we were one of the poor areas of the country, and I certainly don't hear that anymore. I'm not sure that everyone is convinced about the way that we're going forward. But I suppose that's part of leadership and partnership of working, I imagine, because first of all, from partnership working, you can't do that. You couldn't have done that with just as the council. Particularly, I think your budgets were cut by 60%.
Yeah, it was. We were going through some tough times. Yeah.
So there's no way you can deliver that by yourself. So partnerships were important, but having the leadership or the courage, I suppose, that your whole team will have needed, as well as partners that you're involved with, to stand firm and say, no, this is where we're going. This is the idea that we're having. Elected members who make the decisions ultimately from your point of view, that's quite a tough call, because if you've got elections coming around every 4 years,
3 out of every 4 in our case, we're elected by thirds.
Every 4, then you've got to go around knocking on doorways, and if you haven't done what you said you're going to do in that time, does that cause you more difficulties?
So I'm often asked to talk about with local government colleagues or people aspiring to having a career in local government about operating in a no overall control political environment, for example. So during my first few years as chief executive, we were in no overall control. So no one political group of the council had overall control of the council. That would ordinarily make life difficult, wouldn't it? But I'll say this forever. When it comes to the crunch, whatever the political colour of a councillor, certainly in North East Lincolnshire, they all fundamentally want the same thing. They want their place to be positive, prosperous. They want people to have opportunity. They want young people to succeed. They want businesses to be successful. They want prosperity. The right kind. Local people, local business, local communities. They want the place to grow. There are differences around that in terms of philosophy and how you get there, but the fundamental. So I just stuck to the fundamental aim in my conversations with the politicians behind the scenes, because I have to be impartial, completely neutral, non-political. Just say, this is what I think, but in order to achieve your political objective or your political objective or your political objective, we still need to go in that direction, have that conversation with those departments of state that we've never had a conversation with ever, frankly. Yeah. And we need, with any government, by the way, any government from experience, relationships that all sectors are important. Communities, views and involvement, fundamentally important. But with any government I've engaged with in my time as a senior officer in the last 11 years, one of the first questions I'm asked is, what does the private sector think? What does business think? Where's the relationship going there? And that was why I invested in that personally in my early days, the relationship with business in this borough. So the politics, it can be difficult. They don't agree on everything. Well, that's local democracy.
Yeah. How long may that continue?
But when absolutely. All I do is count the votes, Mark. That's all I do. Yeah. But in terms of the overall objective, if we, that's the overall objective. Yes, there might be differences around the edges about how you get there, but no one can argue that over the last, if they're being objective, no one can argue that over the last 5, 10, I might be wrong when I say this, someone will tell me, 5, 10 years, the amount of grant funding that's come into this borough, the amount of inward investment that's now developing as a result of what's happening in the last 5, 10 years in this borough, not because of one person, let me be very clear, but because of the way we've articulated a narrative together and steered a certain path together, political, business or otherwise, is happening because of we're staying true to this one overall aim. We're going to disagree on certain things, quite rightly. We're going to have our scraps in the council chamber about those things, quite rightly. But when it comes to those really big strategic things, we want our place to go forward. Yeah. This is what needs to happen. And that takes guts. Takes a bit of bravery, means taking the odd risk. And I've taken personal, professional risks in my role as chief, certainly in the early days, about pushing us into the right place as an organisation with the support of political leaders across the spectrum. Yeah. If you're lucky, that's what you get. But it is about those relationships too. Trust, impartiality, keep going.
Your running of a council, it has all of those challenges that any business of any size would have, but I suppose this added part of having elected members who that's peculiar to a democratically elected council, and as you say, part of our democracy. So something to be celebrated. Just adds a whole new dynamic to leadership and to the way that you can run things. If you indulge me, I had a real strong lesson when, like many people at one place or another, I was criticising whatever councillor was in place at that time, and someone said to me, "Well, so did you stand for election? I said no. He said, well, it's not your business then. They were the ones that went and pushed leaflets through letterboxes and took a whole lot of stuff at the doorway, and they got elected. So they've got a right to be where they are. And I think that stuck with me, because talking about doing, you can talk about a lot of things, but talking about doing and being there, no one goes into politics, well, certainly not at a local level, without the view that I want to do this to make a difference, I imagine.
Yeah.
Imagine that's the case.
Agree.
Because it's not a power trip, that's for sure. It's only a whole lot of headache. Okay. All right. So that's it's a really big part of your role is communicating both to your staff and to the members of the public. And I think we all know that with the rise of social media, sometimes the public aren't always kind about things. So I want to come back to this well-being bit that you talked about. I suspect it's not something that enough people talk about, but when you're in a role, quite a public-facing role that you're in, that everyone owns, in today's world, that can be quite challenging, I imagine, both for you and your family.
Yep.
So how have you dealt with that over the years and with these tough decisions that have been made?
You mentioned the first most important thing, my family. So being a senior leader in any business or sector is challenging. I think there is a different dimension when you're the most senior non-elected leader in a public sector setting, and that's to be a chief executive of the council. Yeah. And to be the chief executive of the council where you live and where your family have been born and raised adds another dimension, both one of pride, because I think that instills that desire in you to keep this ship sailing in the right direction and doing the right thing for place. I do believe in that. I often get, is it important for someone in the role like I'm in to live here? Well, I wouldn't say you have to live here, but you have to connect with the place. Yeah. But I would hold high stock, no disrespect to anybody who's not, in a place like this particularly. Not necessarily being from it, but certainly having been grown in it. I've been here 34 years now, so I'm nearly local, but my kids were born here, my wife's from here. That matters. So connecting with the place is both a challenge, and living and connecting with the place is a challenge. And when you live in the place, there's a danger that you see everything that is said. Yeah. And I used to look at everything that was said back in the day. So my first couple of years in this role, I would look. I was pretty actively engaged on most platforms, social media platforms. I've come away from one or two for, don't need to explain why, but I have. There are one or two I still engage on. I think you've got to make sure that you ignore the stuff that you know is there to be ignored. People will have a view, let them express it. Sometimes that can be difficult, especially when your family see it, but you have to have a support network around you. I go back to what I said in terms of lessons to my successor. Have the right people around you. There are 2 or 3 occasions in my 11 years, 2 or 3 particularly, that were very dark for me personally, in a professional world. And the 3, 4, 5 people, a number of whom are still around me, who were around me then and looked after me when I was well down, are amazing people, and I'd do the same for them. So ignore what's being said. Thick skin. It just comes, unfortunately. It has developed over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years in local government and the NHS and other parts of the public sector. Thick skin is a necessary requirement of a very senior leadership role. Just accept that, because if you're not ready for that, it will hit you like a train and you might not recover from it. Have the right people around you. Look after yourself, exercise, music in my case. I don't drum, Mark. Exercise, lots of music. I'm rebuilding my vinyl collection. I love a decent podcast. I read the odd book. 2 dogs, family. I was brought up by a soldier who served his country for 35 years, who was away for 6 months of the year. But one thing I learned from Dad, who I was talking to last night, is that family is the most important thing. And he managed that even though he was away 6 months a year. That was instilled in me, and that's one thing I hope my 3 men take forward. Yeah,
that's great. Here to the idea about family, that's always got to, and that's your ground, isn't it? That's your anchor for all the things that you're going through. And I suppose in terms of managing your own mental health, really, being able to control what you read and what you look at and how you identify those as either serious or they don't require my time is an important skill in a way to learn.
when to apply the filters, when not to apply the filters, when to deal with something, when to not react to something. Also, I should mention, I'm fortunate to have a decent network around the country of senior leaders in local government. There are one or two, particularly one chief executive in another place who I call on not too often, but to have a chat about things. So the mentoring relationship, the peer relationship, the coaching relationship, they're important. My advice to any senior leader in any sector: you're never the finished article, because if you are, you're finished. Have someone you can go to that will ask the question, support you, give you feedback, challenge you in a supportive environment. Coaching, mentoring, really, really important for a leader.
And I suppose there's no point in just hoping that good people are going to say good things, because if you they're so far and few between. It seems that the human condition is everyone's very vocal about things that are wrong or that they feel are wrong, and very quiet about things that they're content with. And don't say so. It's no good.
We also make mistakes, by the way. So when that hurts even more. Those are the ones that hurt when we've got something wrong. And then it starts flying in. Actually,
then you're even more sensitive to criticism.
That's on the chin stuff, and you've got to take it on the chin, because we make mistakes.
Yeah.
We're human.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's get on to lighter things. Thanks
Please.
for that. I think that's really important to share that, though, because a lot of people are affected now by the way that social media works, and I think there's not many more than people like you in public office or high public office who are subject to that kind of thing. So thank you for that. That's really, really important. So on to lighter things. Yeah. So I talked a little bit about the way that North East Lincolnshire has been described in the past. So let's just take ourselves into a bit of a world of maybe, and let's imagine that you were on Dragon's Den, because there's a new series of that back on now, and you were there to sell North East Lincolnshire as a place of investment to these 5 dragons that were there, and you had a limited period of time. So what kind of things would you focus on? If you were saying, right, now the reason you should put your money, Tuka or Deborah, or someone Peter Jones, put money into North East Lincolnshire is this, what would you say to them?
Here comes a bureaucrat's answer, and for the listeners, this was not rehearsed. I would say, this might not land very well. I would pitch as follows: North East Lincolnshire. Did you know, if you go into that supermarket today and buy that frozen fish, there's a 70% chance that it's been processed and delivered from Grimsby, the UK's leading seafood cluster? They'd be yawning at that point, even though that's hugely significant and important to us. Did you know we host the UK's largest port by tonnage and growing at Immingham? And they'd still be yawning. Because, well, oh, great, okay, fine. But that's important. Oh, and by the way, we're at the epicentre of the energy transition, renewable energy boom right here. We've got the largest offshore wind operations and maintenance hub in the world in the port of Grimsby.
You've already got Deborah Meaden leaning forward.
Yeah, now she's leaning forward. Why does that matter? Because this very small place packs a very big punch. We used to be shy about that. We're not shy anymore. We can't do it alone. We operate beyond our borders. We're operating from the 1st of May with a mayoral combined county authority across Greater Lincolnshire, 1.1 million people. We're on the coast. We're on the Humber Estuary, where it's all happening. But most importantly, we want to make it happen for the next generation of young people. We want people to stay here, because when they do come here, by the way, they don't leave. But we want those who are born and raised here to have the opportunity to stay and to thrive and to prosper here too. Half-decent football team. Not Liverpool Football Club, but half decent in Grimsby Town, up the Mariners. I've got to get that in for the odd listener. Right. But once upon a time, we used to wear deprivation as a badge of honour. We now wear expectation, pride and hope as our ambition and our direction. Come to North East Lincolnshire.
Right, I'd like to make you an offer. That's what would happen. That's great. No, that's good stuff. Thank you. And that really articulates the journey that we've been on, because that wasn't the message that's been given out, and now it is. And if you were to leave with anything in your mind about what you'd have achieved over, and you and your team rather have achieved, it's changing the narrative about Grimsby, and it makes it a lot easier to fly the flag for the place. Okay, so staying in this world of because we get allowed to do this now, because you as you keep saying, you've got 13 weeks left. If you're unable to in the next 13 weeks, you must have had an ideal about what you wanted to achieve in your first 5 years, maybe, of being here. Is there anything, or two questions. What is the thing that you're most proud of having achieved as a leader of the council? And is there anything that you really hope, won't be achieved in 13 weeks, but you really hope that your successor goes on to create?
I think we've been talking about it. I do think that sense of ambition that, I'll say it again, I don't think existed across the borough at the point I came into this role, that is now redolent, evident and growing. Not everybody agrees with where it's heading and why, but there is an ambition for this patch now. I've been here for 30 odd years, worked for this council all of my career. There is a clear, strong ambition for this place, informed by strong relationships with partners across key sectors, which we've talked about. That's hugely important. Don't lose that. Don't lose that. Mayoral combined authorities, bigger footprint. We need a voice, we need influence, we need to articulate an ambition to keep this going for Grimsby, Cleethorpes, Mingham and the villages. We really do. What was the second question?
What is the thing you hope? What was the thing you're most proud of, but also the thing you hope that?
So I think it's the ambition that I'm most proud of, the way it's developed, grown, and is now owned. My hope is that as a chief executive of a council that has been through a lot, local government has been through a lot, and is about to go through a number of changes going forward, always does. There are some amazing people in my organisation that I've seen grow, that I've seen come and go, that do amazing things every day. And my hope is, it's going to sound corny to some, is that, it's where we started the conversation, I think, really appreciate what, in my case, some 1,700 people do every day for the council they work for, from cleaning the streets to emptying the bins, to going into businesses as trading standards officers, if they work in education, children's social care, adult social care, the myriad of things we do. We touch your lives from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep and whilst you're asleep. We're bound not to get everything right, but these people are public servants, and in 99.9% of the time, they care about the place that they serve. Let's recognise and celebrate that, because I think that's been lost over the last 10, 15 years, and I hope that comes back. Yeah. No pressure to my successor.
No, there's a lot. The work never ends, does it? Really, I suppose, but we seem to be on the right journey. Okay, thank you for that. I wanted to start to close off, but with a particular view about the future, because the things are changing a great deal in the country, and particularly in Greater Lincolnshire, because of the mayoral combined authority. Just want to explain in a small paragraph what that is, and then just perhaps expand on what does that actually mean to the person on the street in North East Lincolnshire.
Okay, that's an exam question to finish with. Okay, so let's start with Devolution 101. So the last government and the current government believe in, have a clear policy of delivering devolution in England. That's the transfer or delegation of powers, responsibilities and funding, money, into another body that is not the government. And that body, prescribed by law, is a combined authority. They've existed for a while. Greater Manchester, one of the flagship ones, under Andy Burnham as mayor. West Midlands, another high-profile one. But combined authorities are the bodies that are created to receive the devolution of powers, funding and responsibilities into areas, not councils. Devolution deals are negotiated in a given area with councils before the combined authority is formed. And those councils become the bodies that form the combined authority, constituent councils. The Lincolnshire County Council, North Lincolnshire Council and North East Lincolnshire Council as the constituent authorities for Greater Lincolnshire, the ones that could negotiate by law the devolution deal with the government over the last 18 months, are the three constituent authorities that settled the deal with the government and have now, with the government's consent through legislation, formed a mayoral combined county authority for Greater Lincolnshire. So what? The devolution deal itself, it's a public document, very available, £720 million over 30 years of new money, 24 million a year. Might not sound a lot, but it actually is significant. Powers invested in a mayor to be elected on the 1st of May to deal with transport and infrastructure. So the only functions that will go up from the three councils are the strategic transport functions. Devolution is about stuff coming down from the government to the combined authority. Councils in all combined authorities give up strategic transport responsibilities. The best way to explain that is we keep the potholes as councils, but the planes, trains and automobiles go up to the combined authority. Okay. So economic growth at the strategic level, investing that huge amount of money over 30 years and growing that pot through other means if necessary, and as many other combined authorities have done. Transport and infrastructure, look at Greater Lincolnshire, and I would say to you, I think we agree one of the biggest challenges we face as a geography is that infrastructure piece, both digital and physical, and the skills agenda. So the government will devolve, delegate, transfer down, subject to some readiness tests in the next 18 months to 2 years, the adult education budget from the Department for Education. So economic growth, skills, transport and infrastructure, and so on. A huge opportunity. The three councils are the bodies that form the combined authority, joined by members of the district councils in Lincolnshire. And when the mayor's elected, they will have the responsibility, the powers, and I think most importantly, the influence across a geography that stretches from the south bank of the Humber right down to Grantham, South Holland. 1.1 million people, industrial, rural, a big mix, a big area, one of the biggest in the country. And I think the opportunity for a place like North East Lincolnshire, we've discussed this before, our small part of the world that I said earlier is punching well above its weight, can't continue to punch well above its weight on its own forever. There comes a point when you've peaked. I think we're reaching the point where we've peaked. And I think the combined authority is an opportunity to go further. So it's really important that North East Lincolnshire, going forward, has influence, has voice, through partnership with business, the voluntary sector and so on, to articulate that ongoing ambition and narrative for our area. So when a mayor comes along and says, why should I give any of this to North East Links? It's not just the leader of the council that's making the case. It's not just Mark Webb that's making the case. It's a collective case being made on behalf of leaders across the system in North East Links. So I do think combined authorities they're here to stay. The English Devolution white paper was issued last year. More mayoral combined authorities to come. 6 have been announced in terms of their development by the government in the last week or so. The previous government supported this form of devolution through a combined authority. The current government does, and possibly even more. We have to be on the bus. We have to be in the tent. There's no point being outside or off it. Less influence, less opportunity. We don't agree with everything necessarily. More importantly, politicians may not, because it's about democracy at the end of the day. But having influence, having the case, continuing the ambition, the articulation of the story, the narrative, and engaging in the right way is the way forward, it would seem, for regions, not forgetting the importance of the Humber. Yeah. And the Humber has to be our story going forward as well.
Yeah. Okay, so just to wind that back a bit, do you think, because it's often been talked about as being that the mayoral authorities are actually create a democratic deficit for the people, the communities, because there's a removal of decision making into a level further removed from the community than it is now. So what would your answer be to that? Because in some regards, I can see why people would think that.
So in very strict legal terms, no decision-making has been removed locally upwards. Decision-making has been sent down. The government have devolved powers, sent down powers, responsibilities and funding to this regional body that has been formed by law called a Mayoral Combined County Authority for Greater Lincolnshire, just as there will be on the North Bank for Hull and East Yorkshire. So nothing's gone up apart from those strategic transport responsibilities. Okay. So North East Lincolnshire Council still children's services, adult social care, planning, highways, potholes. All the stuff we do now doesn't change. Now, there's something else being discussed at the moment in the world of local government, the future of councils, their size and their shape. But the role of councils within a devolution context, however big or small they are going forward, is to articulate the case for the area in which they serve and represent, democratically led, have a place at the table to bring influence to bear to ensure that the funding that is coming down comes into the right place. And
so is the price? I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this. Yeah. Is the price of getting that more money drawn down, more influence on a regional basis? Is the price of that needing to take decisions that are good for the whole area, by all the councils involved, rather than taking decisions just for North East Lincolnshire by people in North East Lincolnshire?
Right, so you should ask a politician that question. That's what I'm not. So, no, I'm not a politician. That's my disclaimer. It's going to be a bit of both. There will always be things that matter to this part of the world that a combined authority may not have any interest in, may not have any influence over, but matter to this part of the world. It's the role of the local authority, democratically led, with its partners to make sure that those things still matter.
Okay.
It's a bit of both.
So hence we have to have strong partnerships. We
Absolutely.
have to have a good voice, and we have to
Yeah.
make sure that we're positive about it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
It all comes back to that in the end, doesn't
Yeah.
it? What's our
Yeah.
ambition and our story?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So in a word, I think I know the answer to this, but in a word, for the local businesses, for the business community that's here, mayoral combined authority, threat or opportunity?
More than one word. Opportunity, provided that the relationship that exists with the local authority now is nurtured, developed and sustained. So the voice, the influence, the understanding is shared and articulated. So businesses aren't surprised by what's happening on a bigger footprint. The relationship really matters. Opportunity.
Okay. That was a very long one-word answer.
It was, but I'm a lawyer by background.
No, well, that's fair enough. I'm not paying you by the word. In fact, I'm not paying you at all. So that's a good thing.
For the record, listeners. Yeah.
Okay. A couple of other questions. Because I've always found it interesting, the relationship, and I've watched you and your colleagues, particularly in action, along with business leaders and business community and the conversations that happen. You've been in enough meetings where conversations have gone in a certain direction. What's the one bit of no-nonsense advice that you've given and that you would give to anyone in business when they're dealing with the council?
Say what you think, but say it nicely.
Okay, that's fair enough. Just be polite. It's quite easy, really, isn't it? We should all be able to do that. Okay, and throughout the same period of time, you've had landed across your desk a number of complaints and issues, because that's the nature of the job.
Yep.
So I'd like you to share with me the most bizarre or strange or off the wall complaint that you've received in your time in office.
You should have warned me about that one.
I know I should have. Sorry, but there you go.
Crikey. I've had some, I've seen a lot. Crikey, let me rack my brain a bit. I've had complaints about the number of a certain species of fish in the past.
As chief exec?
Yeah. I'm not going to say as chief executive. I don't want, trigger FOI requests. Joke. But as a director a long time ago, there's something came across my desk about the lack of a certain species of fish in our waters, which, there was no answer to that. There was no answer to that. That was not as chief executive, by the way. I do remember that one vividly, because the late, great, if you remember him, Andy Sampson.
I do,
would ribbon me about that one extensively. Yeah.
Well, it just goes to show it's a variety.
As I said, 70% of the seafood processed in this country is processed in Grimsby. So there you go.
Well, if you're going to talk about that, you have to do with species of fish, I suppose, in any role that you're in. Okay. Look, I'm going to wrap this up now with this question. You might be relieved or not to hear. But we've got a lot to contend with going forward. As much as we have travelled a great distance, and I know that you are. Well, I suppose I should ask you: do you have plans for what you're going to do on week 14?
Summer break, which is the whole of the summer. I am under orders, and I agree. And then. Hopefully back into the world in some form of employed capacity, but never as a local authority chief executive. We'll see how that develops.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I look forward to hearing about that. The person who takes over from you has now already been announced on an interim basis as Sharon Root, your finance director.
Yep.
A person I know is greatly respected and admired across the council and in other quarters. So when you leave and you go out the door on the last day, and with a little dance as you go, what might you say to her as she takes on her first day of office about her first? It's popular to talk about the first 100 days, isn't it? About her first 100 days in office. What might you say? Because you talked about the focus at the beginning. Focus on this. Get this finished, or start this, or what might you say to her?
Two things. Because we have been talking about these things, so I may as well repeat the two things. We've talked about many things, but these two things in particular. In no particular order, don't ever think, what would Rob do? Because that doesn't matter anymore. And think about how you, Sharon, successor, interim successor, just saying that for the record so I don't get told off by anybody, are going to communicate and engage in your own way and in the style that you feel most comfortable with the workforce, with counsellors and with our partners. Oh, and by the way, get out into the borough and be visible in the community, because I wish I'd done a lot more of that.
Okay. That's good advice, I think, for anyone, and probably quite encouraging for anyone taking on that office. Okay, look, when this podcast goes out, it'll be alive and going for years. It'll sit on our channel. So I can both wish you good luck and also say to you, I hope you're having a good time, depending on when people listen to this. It's been a great journey that you've been on, and I really appreciate you taking what must be a very busy schedule in these last number of weeks for you, taking time to come and do this podcast. I'll certainly send you one just for you to reminisce about in the years to come. But I'm no doubt Grimsby's in your heart and will remain so. So thank you for coming to do this podcast, thank you for speaking so freely.
Loved it. Thank you very much for asking.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot.